Chivalry has long been dead, but back in the late 19th century it still had a spark. A gentleman could come to the rescue of a woman without being jeered as a simp or beta male. In the tale of the Spirit's Whisper, a man in London attempts to aid a woman in distress who is falling under the charms of an unscrupulous suitor. Will he be able to pull off this feat? What if he has the assistance of a mysterious spirit that whispers in his ear? Listen to the Spirit's Whisper to find out, and I hope that you will enjoy. If you're enjoying this reading from Friendly Frog Press, please make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. The Spirit's Whisper by Sheridan Le Fanu, narrated by Beauheart. Yes, I have been haunted so fearfully that for some little time I thought myself insane. I was no raving maniac. I mixed in society as heretofore, although perhaps a trifle more grave and taciturn than usual. I pursued my daily avocations. I employed myself even on literary work. To all appearance, I was one of the sanest of the sane, and yet all the while I considered myself the victim of such strange delusions that, in my own mind, I fancied my senses, in one sense in particular, so far erratic and beyond my own control that I was, in real truth, a madman. How far I was then insane it must be for others, who hear my story, to decide. My hallucinations have long since left me, and at all events, I'm now as sane as I suppose most men are. My first attack came one afternoon when, being in a listless and idle mood, I had risen from my work and was amusing myself with speculating at my window on the different personages who were passing before me. At that time I occupied apartments in the Brompton Road. Perhaps there is no thoroughfare in London where the ordinary passengers are so varied as description or high life and low life mingle in so perpetual a medley. South Kensington carriages there jostle costermongers' carts. The clerk in the public office, returning to his suburban dwelling, brushes the laborer coming from his work on the never-ending modern constructions in the new district. And the ladies of some of the surrounding squares flaunt the most gigantic of chignons and the most exuberant of motley dresses before the envying eyes of the ragged girls with their vegetable baskets. There was, as usual, plenty of material for observation and conjecture in the passengers, and their characters or destinations from my window on that day. Yet, I was not in the right cue for the thorough enjoyment of my favorite amusement. I was in a rather melancholy mood. Somehow or other, I don't know why, my memory had reverted to a pretty woman whom I had not seen for many years. She had been my first love. I loved her with a boyish passion as genuine as it was intense. I thought my heart would have broken, and I certainly talked seriously of dying, when she formed an attachment to an ill-conditioned, handsome young adventurer, and, on her family objecting to such an alliance, eloped with him. I had never seen the fellow, against whom, however, I cherished a hatred almost as intense as my passion for the infatuated girl who had flown from her home for his sake. We had heard of her being on the continent with her husband, and learned that the man's shifty life had eventually taken him to the east. For some years nothing more had been heard of the poor girl. It was a melancholy history, and its memory ill-disposed me for amusement. A sigh was probably just escaping my lips with the half-articulated words, "Poor Julia," when my eyes fell on a man passing before my window. There was nothing particularly striking about him. He was tall, with fine features, and a long fair beard contrasting somewhat with his bronzed complexion. I had seen many of our officers on the return from the Crimea look much the same. Still, the man's aspect gave me a shuddering feeling. I didn't know why. At the same moment, a whispering, low voice uttered aloud in my ear the words, "It is he!" I turned, startled. There was no one near me, no one in the room. There was no fancy in the sound. I'd heard the words with painful distinctness. I ran to the door, opened it, not a sound on the staircase, not a sound in the whole house, nothing but the hum from the streets. I came back and sat down. It was no use reasoning with myself. I had the ineffaceable conviction that I had heard the voice. Then first the idea crossed my mind that I might be the victim of hallucinations. Yes, it must have been so, for now I recalled to mind that the voice had been that of my poor lost Julia, and at the moment I heard it, I had been dreaming of her. I questioned my own state of health. I was well, at least I had been so. I felt fully assured up to that moment. Now a feeling of chilliness and numbness and faintness had crept over me. A cold sweat was on my forehead. I tried to shake off this feeling by bringing back my thoughts to some other subject. But, involuntarily as it were, I again uttered the words, "Poor Julia," aloud. At the same time, a deep and heavy sigh, almost a groan, was distinctly audible close by me. I sprang up. I was alone, quite alone. It was, once more, an hallucination. By degrees, the first painful impression wore away. Some days had passed, and I had begun to forget my singular delusion. When my thoughts revert to it, the recollection was dismissed as that of a ridiculous fancy. One afternoon I was in the Strand, coming from Charing Cross, when I was once more overcome by that peculiar feeling of cold and numbness which I had before experienced. The day was warm and bright and genial, and yet I positively shivered. I had scarce time to interrogate my own strange sensations when a man went by me rapidly. How was it that I recognized him at once as the individual who had only passed my window so casually on that morning of the hallucination? I don't know, and yet I was aware that this man was the tall, fair passer-by of the Brompton Road. At the same moment, the voice I had previously heard whispered distinctly in my ear the words, "Follow him." I stood stupefied. The usual throngs of indifferent persons were hurrying past me in that crowded thoroughfare, but I felt convinced that not one of these had spoken to me. I remained transfixed for a moment. I was bent on a manner of business in the contrary direction to the individual I had remarked, and so, although with unsteady step, I endeavored to proceed on my way. Again that voice said, still more emphatically in my ear, "Follow him." I stopped involuntarily, and a third time, "Follow him." I told myself that the sound was a delusion, a cheat of my senses. Yet I could not resist the spell. I turned to follow. Quickening my pace, I soon came up with this tall, fair man, and unremarked by him, I followed him. Whither was this foolish pursuit to lead me? It was useless to ask myself the question. I was impelled to follow. I was not destined to go very far, however. Before long, the object of my absurd chase entered a well-known insurance office. I stopped at the door of the establishment. I had no business within. Why should I continue to follow? Had I not already been making a sad fool of myself by my ridiculous conduct? These were my thoughts as I stood heated by my quick walk. Yes, heated, and yet once more came the sudden chill. Once more that same low but now awful voice spoke in my ear. "Go in," it said. I endeavored to resist the spell, and I felt that resistance was in vain. Fortunately, as it seemed to me, the thought crossed my mind that an old acquaintance was a clerk in that same insurance office. I had not been the fellow for a great length of time, and I never had been very intimate with him. But here was a pretext, and so I went in and inquired for Clement Stanley. My acquaintance came forward. He was very busy, he said. I invented on the spur of the moment some excuse of the most frivolous and absurd nature, as far as I can recollect, for my intrusion. "By the way," I said, as I turned to take my leave, although my question was by the way of nothing at all, "who was that tall, fair man who just now entered the office?" "Oh, that fellow?" was the indifferent reply. "Captain Campbell, or Kenton, or some such name. I forget what. He has gone in before the board, insured his wife's life, and she is dead. Comes for a settlement, I suppose." There's nothing more to be gained, and so I left the office. As soon as I came without into the scorching sunlight, again the same feeling of cold, again the same voice. "Wait!" Was I going mad? More and more the conviction forced itself upon me that I was decidedly a monomaniac already. I felt my pulse. It was agitated and yet not feverish. I was determined not to give way to this absurd hallucination. And yet, so far was I out of my senses that my will was no longer my own. Resolved as I was to go, I listened to the dictates of that voice and waited. What was it to me that this Campbell or Kenton had insured his wife's life, that she was dead, and that he wanted a settlement of his claim? Obviously nothing. I yet waited. So strong was the spell on me that I had no longer any count of time. I had no consciousness whether the period was long or short that I stood there near the door, heedless of all the throng that passed, gazing on vacancy. The fiercest of policemen might have told me to move on. I should not have stirred, spite of all the terrors of the station. The individual came forth. He paid no heed to me. Why should he? What was I to him? This time I needed no warning voice to bid me follow. I was a madman. I could not resist the impulses of my madness. It was thus, at least, I reasoned with myself. I followed into Regent Street. The object of my insensate observation lingered and looked around as if in expectation. Presently, a fine-looking woman, somewhat extravagantly dressed, and obviously not a lady, advanced toward him on the pavement. At the sight of her, he quickened his step and joined her rapidly. I shuddered again, but this time a sort of dread was mingled with that strange shivering. I knew what was coming, and it came. Again, that voice in my ear. "Look and remember," it said. I passed the man and woman as they stopped at their first meeting. "Is all right, George?" said the female. "All right, my girl," was the reply. I looked. An evil smile, as if of wicked triumph, was on the man's face, I thought. And on the woman's? I looked at her, and I remembered. I could not be mistaken. In spite of her change in manner, dress, and appearance, it was Mary Sims. This woman, some years before, when she was still very young, had been a sort of humble companion to my mother. A simple-minded, honest girl, we thought her. Sometimes I had fancied that she had paid me, in a sly way, a marked attention. I had been foolish enough to be flattered by her stealthy glances and her sighs, but I had treated these little demonstrations of partiality as due only to a silly girlish fancy. Mary Sims, however, had come to grief in our household. She had been detected in the abstraction of sundry jewels and penny ornaments. The morning after discovery she had left the house, and we had heard of her no more. As these recollections passed rapidly through my mind, I looked behind me. The couple had turned back. I turned to follow again, and, in spite of carriages and cabs, and shouts and oaths of driver, I took the middle of the street in order to pass the man and woman at a little distance, unobserved. No, I was not mistaken. The woman was Mary Sims, though without any trace of all her former simple-minded airs. Mary Sims, no longer in her humble attire, but flaunting in all the finery of overdone fashion. She wore an air of reckless joyousness in her face, and yet, in spite of that, I pitied her. It was clear she had fallen on the evil ways of bettered fortune, better to last for the worse. I had an excuse now, in my own mind, for my continued pursuit, without deeming myself an utter madman, the excuse of curiosity to know the destiny of one with whom I had been formerly familiar, and in whom I had taken an interest. Presently, the game I was hunting down stopped at the door of the Grand Café. After a little discussion, they entered. It was a public place of entertainment. There was no reason why I should not enter also. I found my way to the first floor. They were already seated at a table, Mary holding the cart in her hand. They were about to dine. Why should I not dine there too? There was but one little objection. I had an engagement to dinner. But the strange impulse which overpowered me and seemed leading me on step by step, spite of myself, quickly overruled all the dictates of propriety toward my intended hosts. Could I not send a prettily devised apology? I glided past the couple, with my head averted, seeking a table, and I was unobserved by my old acquaintance. I was too agitated to eat, but I made a semblance and little heeded the air of surprise and almost disgust on the bewildered face of the waiter as he bore away the barely touched dishes. I was in a very fever of impatience and doubt what next to do. They still sat on, in evident enjoyment of their meal and their constant draughts of sparkling wine. My impatience was becoming almost unbearable when the man at last rose. The woman seemed to have uttered some expostulation, for he turned at the door and said somewhat harshly aloud, "Nonsense, only one game and I shall be back. The waiter will give you a paper, a magazine, something to while away the time." He left the room for the billiard table, as I surmised. Now was my opportunity. After a little hesitation, I rose and planted myself abruptly in the vacant seat before the woman. "Mary," I said. She started with a little exclamation of alarm and dropped the paper she had held. She knew me at once. Master John? She exclaimed, using the familiar term still given me when I was long past boyhood. And then, after a lengthened gaze, she turned away her head. I was embarrassed at first how to address her. Mary, I said at last, I am grieved to see you thus. Why should you be grieved for me? She retorted, looking at me sharply and speaking in a tone of impatient anger. I am happy as I am. I don't believe you, I replied. She again turned away her head. Mary, I pursued, can you doubt that, spite of all, I have still a strong interest in the companion of my youth? She looked at me almost mournfully, but did not speak. At that moment I probably grew pale, for suddenly that chilly fit seized me again, and my forehead became clammy. That voice sounded again in my ear. Speak of him, were the words it uttered. Mary gazed at me with surprise, and I was assured that she had not heard that voice, so plain to me. She evidently mistook the nature of my visible emotion. Oh, Master John, she stammered, with tears gathering in her eyes, reverting again to that name of bygone times. If you had loved me then, if you had consoled my true affection with one word of hope, one look of loving kindness, if you had not spurned and crushed me, I should not have been what I am now. I was about to make some answer to this burst of unforgotten passion when the voice came again. Speak of him. You have loved others since, I remarked with a coldness which seemed cruel to myself. You love him now. And I nodded my head toward the door by which the man had disappeared. Do I? She said with a bitter smile. Perhaps. Who knows? And yet no good can come to you from a connection with that man, I pursued. Why not? He adores me and he is free, was her answer, given with a little triumphant air. Yes, I said, I know he is free. He has lately lost his wife. He has made good his claim to the sum for which he insured her life. Mary grew deadly pale. How did you learn this? What do you know of him? She stammered. I had no reply to give. She scanned my face anxiously for some time, then in a low voice she added, What do you suspect? I was still silent and only looked at her fixedly. You do not speak, she pursued nervously. Why do you not speak? Ah, you know more than you would say. Master John, you might set my tortured mind at rest and clear or confirm those doubts which will come into my poor head, spite of myself. Speak out. Oh, do speak out. Not here. It is impossible, I replied, looking around. The room, as the hour advanced, was becoming more thronged with guests, and the full tables gave a pretext for my reticence, when in truth I had nothing to say. Will you come and see me, will you? She asked with earnest entreaty. I nodded my head. Have you a pocketbook? I will write you my address. You will come. Yes, I'm sure you will come, she said in an agitated way. I handed her my pocketbook and pencil. She wrote rapidly. Between the hours of 3 and 5, she whispered, looking uneasily at the door. He is sure not to be at home. I rose. Mary held out her hand to me, then withdrew it hastily with an air of shame, and the tears sprang into her eyes again. I left the room hurriedly, and met her companion on the stairs. That same evening, in the solitude of my own room, I pondered over the little event of the day. I calmed down from my state of excitement. The living apparition of Mary Sims occupied my mind almost to the exclusion of the terrors of the ghostly voice which had haunted me, and my own fears of coming insanity. In truth, what was that man to me? Nothing. What did his doings matter to such a perfect stranger as myself? Nothing. His connection with Mary Sims was our only link. And what should that affect me? Nothing again. I debated with myself whether it were not foolish of me to comply with my youthful companion's request to visit her, whether it were not imprudent in me to take any further interest in the lost woman, whether there were not even danger in seeking to penetrate mysteries which were no concern of mine. The resolution to which I came pleased me, and I said aloud, No, I will not go. At the same moment came again the voice, like an awful echo to my words, Go! It came so suddenly and so imperatively, almost without any previous warning of the usual shudder, that the shock was more than I could bear. I believe I fainted. I found myself, when I came to consciousness, in my armchair, cold and numb, and my candles had almost burned down into their sockets. The next morning I was really ill. A sort of low fever seemed to have prostrated me, and I would have willingly seized so valid a reason for disobeying, at least for that day, for some days perhaps, the injunction of that ghostly voice. But all that morning it never left me. My fearful chilly fit was of constant recurrence, and the words, "Go, go, go," were murmured so perpetually in my ears. The sound was one of such urgent entreaty that all force of will gave way completely. Had I remained in that lone room, I should have gone wholly mad. As yet, to my own feelings, I was but partially out of my senses. I dressed hastily, and, I scarce know how, by no effort of my own will, it seemed to me, I was in the open air. The address of Mary Sims was in a street not far from my own suburb. Without any power of reasoning, I found myself before the door of the house. I knocked and asked a slipshod girl who opened the door to me for Miss Sims. She knew no such person. The brief shrill colloquy with some female in the back parlor, and, on coming back, was about to shut the door in my face, when a voice from above, the voice of her I sought, called down the stairs, "Let the gentleman come up." I was allowed to pass. In the front drawing room I found Mary Sims. "They do not know me under that name," she said with a mournful smile, and again extended, then withdrew her hand. "Sit down," she went on to say, after a nervous pause. "I am alone now. Told I adjure you, if you have still one latent feeling of old kindness for me, explain your words of yesterday to me." I muttered something to the effect that I had no explanation to give. No words could be truer. I had not the slightest conception what to say. "Yes, I'm sure you have. You must, you will," pursued Mary excitedly. "You have some knowledge of that matter." "What matter?" I asked. "Why, the insurance," she replied impatiently. "You know well what I mean. My mind has been distracted about it. In spite of myself, terrible suspicions have forced themselves on me. No, I don't mean that," she cried, suddenly checking herself and changing her tone. "Don't heed what I said. It was madness in me to say what I did, but do tell me all you know." The request was a difficult one to comply with, for I knew nothing. It is impossible to say what might have been the end of this strange interview, in which I began to feel myself an unwilling impostor. But suddenly Mary started. "The noise of the latchkey in the lock," she cried, alarmed. "He has returned. He must not see you. You must come another time. Here, be quick. I'll manage him." And before I could utter another word, she had pushed me into the back drawing room and closed the door. A man's step on the stairs, then voices. The man was begging Mary to come out with him, as the day was so fine. She excused herself. He would hear no refusal. At last she appeared to consent on condition that the man would assist at her toilet. There was a little laughter, almost hysterical on the part of Mary, whose voice evidently quivered with trepidation. Presently both mounted the upper stairs. Then the thought struck me that I had left my hat in the front room, sufficient cause for the woman's alarm. I opened the door cautiously, seized my hat, and was about to steal down the stairs when I was again spellbound by that numb cold. "Stay," said the voice. I staggered back to the other room with my hat and closed the door. Presently the couple came down. Mary was probably relieved by discovering that my hat was no longer there, and surmised that I had departed, for I heard her laughing as they went down the lower flight. Then I heard them leave the house. I was alone in that back drawing room. Why? What did I want there? I was soon to learn. I felt the chill invisible presence near me, and the voice said, "Search!" The room belonged to the common representative class of back drawing rooms in apartments of the better kind. The only one unfamiliar piece of furniture was an old Indian cabinet, and my eye naturally fell on that. As I stood and looked at it with a strange, unaccountable feeling of fascination, again came the voice, "Search!" I shuddered and obeyed. The cabinet was firmly locked. There was no power of opening it except by burglarious infraction. But still the voice said, "Search!" A thought suddenly struck me, and I turned the cabinet from its position against the wall. Behind, the woodwork had rotted, and many portions fallen away, so that the inner drawers were visible. What could my ghostly monitor mean, that I should open those drawers? I would not do such a deed of petty treachery. I turned defiantly, and addressing myself to the invisible as if it were a living creature by my side, I cried, "I must not, will not, do such an act of baseness." The voice replied, "Search!" I might have known that, in my state of what I deemed insanity, resistance was in vain. I grasped the most accessible drawer from behind and pulled it toward me. Uppermost within it lay letters. They were addressed to Captain Cameron, Captain George Cameron. That name, the name of Julia's husband, the man with whom she had eloped, for it was he who was the object of my pursuit. My shuddering fit became so strong that I could scarce hold the papers, and "Search!" was repeated in my ear. Below the letters lay a small book and a limp black cover. I opened this book with trembling hand. It was filled with manuscript, Julia's well-known handwriting. "Read," muttered the voice. I read. There were long entries by poor Julia of her daily life, complaints of her husband's unkindness, neglect, then cruelty. I turned to the last pages. Her hand had grown very feeble now, and she was very ill. "George seems kinder now," she wrote. "He brings me all my medicines with his own hand." Later on, "I am dying. I know I am dying. He has poisoned me. I saw him last night through the curtains pour something in my cup. I saw it in his evil eye. I would not drink. I would drink no more, but I feel that I must die." These were the last words. Below were written in a man's bold hand the words, "Poor fool." The sudden revelation of poor Julia's death and dying thoughts unnerved me quite. I grew colder in my whole frame than ever. "Take it," said her voice. I took the book, pushed back the cabinet into its place against the wall, and leaving that fearful room, stole down the stairs with trembling limbs, and left the house with all the feelings of a guilty thief. For some days I pursued my poor lost Julia's diary again and again. The whole revelation of her sad life and sudden death led but to one conclusion. She had died of poison by the hands of her unworthy husband. He had insured her life, and then it seemed evident to me that Mary Sims had vaguely shared suspicions of the same foul deed. On my own mind came conviction. But what could I do next? How bring this evil man to justice? What proof would be deemed to exist in those writings? I was bewildered, weak, irresolute. Like Hamlet, I shrank back and temporized. But I was not feigning madness. My madness seemed but all too real for me. During all this period, the wailing of that wretched voice in my ear was almost incessant. Oh, I must have been mad. I wandered about restlessly like the haunted thing I had become. One day I had come unconsciously and without purpose into Oxford Street. My troubled thoughts were suddenly broken in upon by the solicitations of a beggar. With a heart hardened against begging impostors, and under the influence of the shock rudely given to me by absorbing dreams, I answered more hardly than was my wont. The man heaved a heavy sigh and sobbed forth, "Then heaven help me." I caught sight of him before he turned away. He was a ghastly object, with fever in his hollow eyes and sunken cheeks, and fever on his dry, chapped lips. But I knew, or fancied I knew, the tricks of the trade, and I was obdurate. Why, I asked myself, should the cold shudder come over me at such a moment? But it was so strong on me as to make me shake all over. It came, that maddening voice. "Succor!" it said now. I had become so accustomed already to address the ghostly voice that I cried aloud, "Why, Julia, why?" I saw people laughing in my face at this strange cry, and I turned in the direction in which the beggar had gone. I just caught sight of him as he was tottering down a street towards Soho. I determined to have pity for this once, and followed the poor man. He led me on through I know not what streets. His steps was hurried now. In one street I lost sight of him, but I felt convinced he must have turned into a dingy court. I made inquiries, but for a time received only rude, jeering answers from the rough men and women whom I questioned. At last a little girl informed me that I must mean the strange man who lodged in the garret of a house she pointed out to me. It was an old dilapidated building, and I had much repugnance on entering it. But again, I was no master of my will. I mounted some creaking stairs to the top of the house until I could go no further. A shattered door was open. I entered a wretched garret. The object of my search lay now on a bundle of rags on the bare floor. He opened his wild eyes as I approached. "I have come to succor," I said, using unconsciously the word of the voice. "What ails you?" "Ails me?" gasped the man. "Hunger, starvation, fever." I was horrified. Running to the top of the stairs, I shouted till I had roused the attention of an old woman. I gave her money to bring me food and brandy, promising her a recompense for her trouble. "Have you no friends?" I asked the wretched man as I returned. "None," he said feebly. Then, as the fever rose in his eyes and even flushed his pallid face, he said excitedly, "I had a master once, one I periled my soul for. He knows I am dying, but spite of all my letters, he will not come. He wants me dead. He wants me dead. His wish is coming to pass now." "Cannot I find him? Bring him here?" I asked. The man stared at me, shook his head, and at last, as if collecting his faculties with much exertion, muttered, "Yes, it is the last hope. Perhaps you may, and I can be revenged on him at least. Yes, revenged. I have threatened him already." The fellow laughed a wild laugh. "Control yourself," I urged, kneeling by his side. "Give me his name, his address." "Captain George Cameron," he gasped and then fell back. "Captain George Cameron?" I cried. "Speak, what of him?" But the man's senses seemed gone. He only muttered incoherently. The old woman returned with the food and spirits. I found one honest creature in that foul region. I gave her money, provide her more if she would bring a doctor. She departed on her new errand. I raised the man's head, moistened his lips with the brandy, and then poured some of the spirit down his throat. He gulped at it eagerly and opened his eyes, but he still raved incoherently. "I did not do it. It was he. He made me buy the poison. He dared not risk the danger himself, the coward. I knew what he meant to do with it, and yet I did not speak. I was her murderer too. Poor Mrs. Cameron, poor Mrs. Cameron. Do you forgive? Can you forgive?" The man screamed aloud and stretched out his arms as if to fright away a phantom. I had drunken every word, knew the meaning of those broken accents well. Could I have found at last the means of bringing justice on the murderer's head? But the man was raving in a delirium, and I was obliged to hold him with all my strength. A step on the stairs. Could it be the medical man I had sent for? That would be indeed a blessing. A man entered. It was Cameron. He came in jauntily with the words, "How now, Sanders, you rascal? What more do you want to get out of me?" He started at the sight of a stranger. I rose from my kneeling posture like an accusing spirit. I struggled for calm, but passion beyond my control mastered me. And was I not a madman? I seized him by the throat with the words, "Murderer! Poisoner! Where is Julia?" He shook me off violently. "And who the devil are you, sir?" he cried. "That murdered woman's cousin." I rushed at him again. "Lying hound," he shouted and grappled me. His strength was far beyond mine. He had his hand on my throat. A crimson darkness was in my eyes. I could not see. I could not hear. There was a torrent of sound pouring in my ears. Suddenly his grasp relaxed. When I recovered my sight, I saw the murderer struggling with the fever-stricken man, who had risen from the floor and seized him from behind. This unexpected diversion saved my life, but the ex-groom was soon thrown back on the ground. "Captain George Cameron," I cried, "kill me, but you will only heap another murder on your head." He advanced on me with something glittering in his hand. Without a word, he came and stabbed at me, but at the same moment I darted at him with a heavy blow. What followed was too confused for clear remembrance. I saw, no, I will say I fancied that I saw, the dim form of Julia Staunton standing between me and her vile husband. Did he see the vision too? I cannot say. He reeled back and fell heavily to the floor. Maybe it was only my blow that felled him. Then came confusion, a dream of a crowd of people, policemen, muttered accusations. I had fainted from the wound in my arm. Captain George Cameron was arrested. Saunders recovered and lived long enough to be the principal witness on his trial. The murderer was found guilty. Poor Julia's diary, too, which I had abstracted, told fearfully against him, but he contrived to escape the gallows. He had managed to conceal poison on his person and was found dead in his cell. Mary Sims I never saw again. I once received a little scrawl, "I am at peace now, Master John. God bless you." I've had no more hallucinations since that time. The voice has never come again. I found out poor Julia's grave, and as I stood and wept by its side, the cold shudder came over me for the last time. Who shall tell me whether I was once really mad, or whether I was not? End of story. If If you enjoyed this reading, please make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and check out friendlyfrogpress.com, where you can see where our collection of ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks are available. Friendly Frog Press, where the classics come alive. This is Paul Beauheart, signing off.